I think that what the real threat is the erosion of the liberal part of liberal democracy.
The degree to which people respect the courts has plummeted in the last few years.
For Republican politicians, he's governing with loyalists. There are no adults in the room. There are no checks on his behavior.
Politicians get to complain. This is normal. It's not a crisis.
Even what was going on about Trump himself, who's now suddenly totally free of all the crimes he's been charged.
Unsexy bureaucrats are really on the front lines of preserving democracy.
Welcome to Big Ideas. Day-to-day politics, your go-to source for fresh global perspectives. In this podcast, we take big and complex ideas from top thinkers, politicians, and experts and break them down into simple, easy-to-understand concepts. Each episode delivers a clear summary of key ideas, so you can stay informed without getting lost in the noise of politics. In this episode, we are reviewing the ideas on the current and future situation of democracy. The first idea comes from a well-known political scientist and author of The End of History and The Last Man. He recently shared his thoughts with G0 on the current political situation in the United States and around the world. Fukuyama believes the biggest danger to democracy isn't about the election, but the weakening of core democratic values like the rule of law, checks and balances, and limits on government power. He says Donald Trump's actions threaten these values in the United States.
I'm not that worried about the future of democracy. I think that what the real threat is the erosion of the liberal part of liberal democracy. So the liberal part really is the rule of law, constitutional checks and balances, all these constraints on executive power. And I think that that's what Trump is going to threaten in the first instance.
In the US, the president's power is checked by Congress and the judiciary. Judges and institutions are supposed to work independently to make sure the president doesn't misuse power. Fukuyama worries that while Trump might not ruin elections, he could weaken the rule of law, the system that keeps judges and institutions independent. Fukuyama isn't the only one worried. Frederick Davis, a law lecturer at Columbia University and former federal prosecutor, shared similar concerns. In an interview with France 24, he's especially worried about how Trump has damaged people's respect for democratic institutions like the courts.
Is it being weakened? I think so. In part, though, it's because he's affecting policies that I don't like. And that's not quite the same thing as saying that democracy is weakening. Where I'm really worried is his impact on the respect people have for the institutions of government, particularly the courts. The degree to which people respect the courts has plummeted in the last few years. Every time any judge rules against Trump, Trump within nanoseconds says, well, he's corrupt or she's corrupt. And some of these are people I know very well who are the opposite of corrupt. But what he's doing is he's diminishing the respect we have for our institutions. And that is a very subtle but really noxious way to undermine democracy.
While there is a lot of heated debates back and forth and even some silly stuff like calls for a judge's impeachment, the red line hasn't been crossed yet. However, both Michel, the author of American Kleptocracy, and Professor Davis alert that a constitutional crisis could happen soon. If the Chief Justice issues a ruling the president doesn't like, who will enforce it? Maybe no one. And that would be a real problem. Let's listen. Professor Davis, then Michel.
Well, I think we all agree that there's a red line that could happen out there if there is a judicial order where the executive branch, in particular Trump, says, I'm not going to respect it.
Of what would potentially come down the line and potentially very soon if the Trump administration does receive a ruling that is not to its favor, that it does not like. And President Trump says or potentially posts on Truth Social, Chief Justice Roberts has made his decision. Now let him enforce it.
Stephen Levitsky and Lucan Way are concerned about the potential breakdown of American democracy in Trump 2.0. In Foreign Affairs, they suggest that while Trump might not create a full dictatorship where elections are fake and opponents are jailed, he could still seriously damage the system. They don't think he will rewrite the Constitution, but they believe he will abuse government power in ways that hurt democracy. The big difference in second term, they say, is that there won't be as many establishment conservatives to keep Trump in check. That means he will likely do whatever he wants without much pushback. Let's listen to Levitsky explain this himself.
No team and no plan the first time around in 2017, and he did not control the Republican Party. And so he governed with conservative technocrats and a more or less mainstream conservative Republican politicians, and they constrained him. None of that is true anymore. He completely owns the Republican Party. There's no dissent. There is no check from the Republican Party. The entire House of Representatives, led by Republicans, has abdicated and stepped aside. And Trump is governing with loyalists, not with either skilled technocrats or Republican politicians. He's governing with loyalists. There are no adults in the room. There are no checks on his behavior.
Lucan Way points out that protecting democracy starts with paying attention to two key areas: the media and independent government employees, bureaucrats. He believes these bureaucrats are on the front lines of defending democracy right now.
Unsexy bureaucrats are really on the front lines of preserving democracy today.
For everybody on that wall, I'm down here for all the veterans, I'm down here for America, I'm down here because this needs to be done.
Lucan Way argues that the media has already started censoring itself out of fear or pressure.
Trump came to power, they were already sort of lining up behind Trump. And I think the most immediate impact we'll see is you see, these a number of settlements made between ABC and very likely CBS, also Meta, that are almost certainly going to result in kind of a kind of self-censorship by the media and sort of mitigation of criticism of the Trump administration during this term. So I actually find that is something that is already occurring right now.
Levitsky thinks that civil society overall is filled with fear and worry. He talks about resignation and anxiety, and in some cases the media and civil society are resorting to mere pragmatism to survive in the coming years.
When I see Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg getting on their knees, and when you see newspapers folding and CEOs who know better, politicians who know better surrendering, it can be paralyzing. It can be debilitating. It's hard to get up out of bed in the morning and continue to fight for democracy. Each individual civil society leader, every university president, every CEO, every editor, every parent company of a major media outlet has to take care of their shareholders, their university, make sure that they don't face frivolous lawsuits.
Not everyone agrees. Dan Hazelwood, a Republican strategist, thinks what's happening in US democracy is normal. He says struggles over power between the president, the judiciary, and the Congress have existed since the US Constitution was written.
It is part of the democratic system that is unfortunate, but it is true that politicians get to talk, courts get to rule, and then the politicians get to complain. This is normal. It's not a crisis. It's just uncomfortable. And we are having a real hard debate that is uncomfortable about the direction and power of the president and the direction of our country on issues. And Trump is pretty much doing what he said. I mean, the IVF is something that he said he would do, just as he said he was going to actually go after the federal bureaucracy and try and cut it significantly. We're seeing him do that.
Another safeguard for US democracy is the two-party system, which gives a lot of power to Congress. Even though Republicans control both the Senate and the House, it's unlikely they will have total control. However, others, like Professor Divina Frau-Meigs at Sorbonne University, argues that there is already a total imbalance in Congress and in the Supreme Court. She believes that they may not stay neutral in the second Trump term.
of Trump, and every time there is a legal case that comes up, it ends up with them and it's denied. We've seen it with even what was going on about Trump himself, who's now suddenly totally free of all the crimes he's been charged with. So I think we have a different situation from before. There's a concentration on power in one man who is short-circuiting even the other elements, as we were saying. He's not even going through Congress. All these executive orders are doing that, putting Doge inside his own executive space.
Casey Michel is surprised by how Congress, especially traditional Republicans, give up the power granted to them to counter Trump's executive orders.
I think the biggest surprise for a lot of folks in the first month of this new Trump administration is just how little Congress seems to make its presence felt, and in fact, how willing it is to give up the powers that are appropriated to Congress itself. It has been surprising to see just how willingly congressional Republicans especially have rolled over in the face of some of these executives.
Federalism can be the last protection for U.S. democracy that allows states to resist the president. But this could be risky, especially when states rely on federal funding.
I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well, are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with the state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
As President Trump threatened in his speech, U.S. Department of Agriculture suspended $30 million Maine University federal funding the next day. All the signs indicate that there will be disputes, debates, and conflicts in the future of democracy in the next few years of Trump's America. And we might be just at the beginning of everything. Without the mentioned safeguards, it's clear the US president could become too powerful, almost like a king. Whether the safeguards, like the two parties, the courts, the media, civil society, and the bureaucracy actually work, time will tell.